In this video, I'm going to tell you about some hobby motivational traps and how you can avoid them. There's a lot of difficult parts to this wargaming hobby, especially the building and the painting. It's not like other hobbies where you buy a thing like a video game or maybe a fishing pole or whatever, and then you can just start using it kind of right away. You may not be good at it right away, but you can use it right away. With us, you go to the store and you buy some models of some sort of soldiers, a vehicle, whatever, and then you come home and you have to cut all the pieces and put it together and paint it and all that jazz. And that takes extra time, and sometimes that motivation to actually get that stuff done is a little difficult. I've talked about motivation before, but I started thinking recently about like traps, like actual things, situations, that kind of stuff that can make it so that your motivation gets the best of you, or actually your lack of motivation gets the best of you, and then you don't do any hobbying that particular evening or weekend or whatever the deal is. So I wanted to try to identify a bunch, so I started to write some down. And then I talked to Uncle Adam's Irregulars, which are the top tier Patreon folks on the Patreon page. We have a Discord channel, and I broached the question in Discord and got lots of really good answers. So I'm going to start going through a bunch of the traps and try to talk about how to maybe make them so that they're something that you can avoid. One of the biggest ones was biting off more than you could chew. Getting into a situation where you've got too big of a project and it's a situation where you just don't even kind of know where to start. Like, let's say you decide to get into a game like, let's say, Warhammer 40,000, and you buy a 2,500 point army. And now you need to start somewhere, and you don't know whether you should start with troops or HQs or tanks or whatever the deal might be. And that can be problematic. So looking at that from an aspect of like, I have this humongous project I have to get done. Maybe it's you're doing an entire table of terrain and you've got all these ideas for different buildings and the ground cover and trees and all that jazz, but there's so much. It's just really causing you to not really be able to move forward. Honestly, the best way to do it is to take the first step. Break it down into small chunks. If you're looking at a huge 2,500 point Warhammer army or something like that, start out with the troops. Just pick one squad and just work on them. Don't pay attention to the rest of the stuff. Start small and grow slowly. If you're looking at a huge terrain project, maybe just start with the trees. Trees can be kind of something that can get you started. They're not super hard to do. You work on the actual branches and all that jazz, and you put on the fluffy stuff to make the green, and then you go on to the next one, and you start up maybe a assembly line, and then you get that stuff done. And once you've got trees, well, now you want to add buildings. Trying to trick yourself to be motivated sometimes can be a big first step in actually getting going. Another difficult one that came up a lot was decision paralysis. If you are working on a model, even let's say it's some sort of kind of single model as opposed to a whole group of models, and you have to make a decision. Well, do you think should the boots be black or should they be brown? I don't know. There's a lot of different things where you have to make a choice, and that choice can cause you to not be able to kind of move forward. And then not being able to move forward causes you to stop. And then, it's 3 weeks later and you haven't touched the model in a while. The whole concept of trying to figure out what do I do next is a problem that everybody has in not just hobby, but in honestly all aspects of life. One of the biggest tricks though with the hobby is that if you, let's decide, make brown boots instead of black on whatever model it is you're working on, if you really hate it, you can probably paint over it. You know what I mean? In the real world, decisions are sometimes more difficult because you can't just paint over them. So in hobby, understand that, if you don't like it this way, you can paint over that part and try it again differently. Or worst comes to worst, you strip the whole thing and start over. It's not necessarily always recommended, but understand that paint is temporary and you can keep working and get things done. And that's kind of forever, isn't it? Several people also brought up doubt in your own abilities. Obviously, everybody has doubts about their abilities. They call it imposter syndrome in some situations. You could be, been doing a job for a long time, but you feel as if you've been faking it. It's kind of a phenomenon that a lot of people have about how they think that, Everyone else knows what they're doing, but I don't. And that's not really the case. As it turns out, pretty much everybody doesn't know what they're doing. So with that in mind, the idea of trying to come up with, the idea behind doubting your own abilities and whether you should doubt your abilities. Well, here's the deal. This is something that you're training yourself to do. So when you start, you don't have to doubt in your abilities. Your abilities are not very good because you've just started. So as you work along, you will get better. That's the way that these things work. I absolutely doubt your abilities when you first start because you're not a pro painter when you first start. You're not Sam Lenz. You're not, an award winner, whatever. You're somebody who's just getting into it. That's the way it works with every hobby and every skill. So you have to understand that, I'm not very good at this point right now because I'm just starting out, or I've only been doing it for a couple of years and I've now moved to, I want to paint a display bust instead of just a bunch of Space Marines or skeletons, and that's a big step. It is, but worst comes to worst, again, like I said, you can always go back and repaint, or you can always go back and strip it. But taking the time to understand, if you're doubting your abilities, number one, you're very possibly right. Your abilities aren't to this degree yet. But if you're even just doubting your abilities about the ability to just get normal ground troops done or something like that, you can do it. You just have to actually understand that with more practice comes more skill. Going back to a video I did a long time ago, Pachow, this last one kind of deals into this one, and that's perfectionism. A couple of people in the Discord said, hey, I work on a model and work on a model and work on a model to the point where I ruin it. Like I had it good, but then I'm like, if I could just a little bit, and then they work on it a little bit more, and then they goof it up or they overwork it. Paint is a surface, and one of the reasons that in a lot of situations you want to strip and start over might be because you've put it on too thick. And so now if you just add another layer to try to do it again and try to do it again and try to do it again, you're starting to lose detail. You've got all these different issues. So in those situations, perfectionism is, prohibitive. The cost of it is prohibitive, as I said in that old video. And so understanding that and realizing good enough is good enough, and now I can go on to the next thing, that can be great, because if you don't do that, the trap there in that situation is like, well, I couldn't make it perfect and I've now ruined it, and then you're done. It's not a good idea. Now, I mentioned, stripping it and starting over, stuff like that. And that can actually sometimes, in some situations, also be its own motivational trap. Restart-itis, as what somebody in the comments in the Discord mentioned. And restart-itis can be a problem because sometimes you don't need to restart. There are times when you've really kind of goofed it up and everything's bad. Yeah, you restart. It'll be easy. It won't be that big of a deal. But there's other times when you just look at it and you're thinking to yourself, I'm just not motivated to paint, and I just don't know. And your brain starts kind of telling you things like, well, it's not actually that good. You should probably just restart. You should start over. And then what your brain is doing there is trying to get out of work. It's trying to push and kick that can down the road to, future you, so that at some point you'll actually sit down and throw it into some sort of purple drank or whatever it is you're going to use to strip the paint off, and then you'll start over again. Or maybe you won't, but you won't be doing it right now. That's what your brain is always trying to do when you procrastinate, when you run out of motivation to hobby. Your brain is always trying to go, yeah, but let's go do something else. Let's go just sit and stare at the wall, or whatever the deal is. And that's just not a good idea. So sometimes looking at it and saying, it's not terrible, I don't need to restart, and working it a little bit further, but not overworking it, like I said in the last one, and coming to a conclusion, that can really help you. Really, those wins can really help kind of spark you along to keep your motivation going for the next project. A number of people also said that the issue was their hobby space. Some people said, if my hobby space is not absolutely spick and span, then I don't feel as if I can start. I can tell you that my hobby space hasn't been spick and span since I moved into the house back in 2010. So for me, that's generally not an issue. But for some people, looking at even a little bit out of place, they decide, well, now I need to clean. Well, there's a lot of dust from my airbrush. So they take everything off the table and they clean all that, and they do everything, and it's all set and it's cool. And now they didn't get any painting done that night because they've kind of, again, pushed it down. It's kind of deflecting the motivation onto a different thing, which, hopefully then maybe tomorrow night you'll be able to paint, but sometimes that can cause trouble. The other trouble with your hobby space that a lot of people said in the questions that I asked was, my hobby space is not set in stone. It's not like I don't have a room or a basement or a place to do it. Every time I want to sit down and do some hobbying, I have to go get the stuff out of the closet, bring it, set it up on the dining room table, cover the dining room table so I don't mess it up, all that jazz. And the concept of even just starting to go and get all that stuff and set all this stuff up, especially if you've maybe only got an hour to paint or 2 hours to paint, that can be troublesome. So that one's a tough one to fix, frankly. With the perfection, and I have to actually have it perfect before I start working on that, sometimes some people, that's just the way they work. I have a tendency to work messy. But if you can look at it and go, well, I can just kind of work through and maybe I'll clean after I get this project done. Pushing the cleaning off until after the project's done, as opposed to deciding it has to be done right away, may be helpful. As far as I don't have a good place to set up and be able to paint, sometimes I've seen there's a lot of different companies out there that sell these trays. So if you can get like a hobby tray, or you can even build something that has all your stuff on it, and if you can keep it on a shelf someplace and just bring it out, set it down, and start working without having to go and get a box of this and a box of this and a mat and all that jazz, keep it all together, kind of modular, boom, set it down, hobby, done, put it away. That can also help your motivation so that you can actually keep moving. Lastly, one of the big ones, in my opinion, is also not gaming enough. Now, if you're not a gamer and you just like to paint for fun or as a display painter or whatever, well, this doesn't necessarily apply to you. But if you are painting your models because you want to game with them, if you spend weeks and weeks and months constantly painting, but yet never playing, even if it's another game, I'm not saying you have to play this army because you're still working on it, right? But I'm saying you just don't play. If you don't play at all, I think that your mind can actually be like, well, why am I even bothering? Why am I going through all of this? Now, again, this is not one for me. I do play, but I do love to paint. And so I've never been like, man, I just haven't played enough lately and I don't understand what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I'm painting. Even if I maybe only ever barely play this particular kill team, I like the way that they look when they're all done. But for a lot of people, painting is a means to an end, and the end is getting to play more games. So if you're feeling as if this is just too much of an uphill battle and you don't want to do it anymore, take a little break and go do some gaming. Go to your local shop, play, have some friends over, play, go over to their house, play, whatever you're going to do. The playing can reinvigorate you and get it so that you are now more interested to get this particular crew done so that you can bring them the next time you guys get together and play. It's just a good idea if you're doing it for the ends of actually playing to make sure you keep playing so you see that light at the end of the tunnel. So hopefully these were helpful. I want to thank the Patreons, the Uncle Adam's regulars on the Discord for answering kind of a call for me to say, hey, I have these ideas. What ideas do you have? And I hope that some of these can help you overstep some motivational hobby traps that have really kind of sprung on all of us at one time or another. So if you're coming along to a situation where you're like, I just don't, try to determine what's causing that motivational block and maybe come back, watch the video, check it out again, take some notes, I don't care, whatever, and see what you can do to keep your motivation going so you can keep painting and keep having fun, whether it's just for, painting for enjoyment or whether it's to get them onto the tabletop.